Tu maru maru no, te tua te whātui aputi, ka titiro hau ki peka peka, ara mai rā te karere, ko pōna turi, uia mai ki hana.
Kia ora, my name's Lana Bartlett. I'm from Hastings. I work at the Hawke's Bay District Health Board. I'm just going to share with you my story about my father when he was admitted into hospital, primarily because of his foot being stood on by his horse, one of his favourite pets, that eventually he had to have a toe amputated and have a bypass because of poor circulation. He was by the GP diagnosed with gout, but then when the continuous appointments to the doctors, they found that, he expressed to them that he actually got his foot stood on by the horse, and they had a look at it, and it was actually quite, I'd probably say borderline going gangrene. It had was badly infected, and they actually found maggots in there, so they gave it a clean out, and to save they kept him in for a little while to see if they could save the toes, but then when they found out that one wasn't going to heal properly, so they had to amputate it. But once they had amputated it, it was very slow recovery, and they actually found that he had poor circulation, and it was when they sent him to Wellington to have the bypass. So they removed part of a vein out of his arm and put it into where there was really bad circulation in his leg. During the recovery, so following the bypass, it was quite draining emotionally and physically, because as a family, our mother had passed away in 2008. So I think it was about 2 or 3 years after she had passed away that he started to have trouble with his health, more trouble than usual because of his age. So he became very reliant upon myself, and I've got 5 other sisters that live in the area. So we got together and decided that so that he would let the clinicians treat him, we had to stay with him basically 24 hours. So we had a discussion with the hospital, and they let us stay with him on the ward in the evenings. And that, a lot of it was just so he would feel a little bit more comfortable, because he had never been on his own since our mother passed away. I had moved home after she had passed away, so yeah, basically he hadn't been alone majority of his life. So it became, I would go to work during the day and then sleep up on the ward at night, and we'd have turns amongst the sisters, yeah. So it got very physically and emotionally draining. We kept a little diary, which we learnt through our mother's experience, was to keep a diary, so that we could keep each other informed about any changes in his condition or medication or treatment that he had received, and to inform each other about his mood, because his mood, we felt he became quite depressed, because he'd kind of lost his will a bit, because he just couldn't, he was getting sick a lot, and I suppose when you're at age 82, it's quite difficult to go through such a huge operation, a bypass like that. So yeah, I think he got disheartened and lost the will to live. So yeah. One incident I recall was the doctor had a discussion with him and had ordered a I forgot what it's called. I think it might be an ECG, because his breathing at night was particularly very shallow and quite difficult for him to breathe. And he had actually had said during this meeting for his consultant to organise the ECG, and she had forgotten. So I was waiting for it to happen, and then I followed her up about it. And yeah, she was very apologetic, but I had a good rapport with them because I was probably one of the ones they saw all the time. So I was able to say to her, hey, look, what's happening with that ECG, because the breathing's still not getting any better, and in the evenings, and yeah. So they actually, after the ECG, they found that he had, what's it called? Emphysema in one lung, and that one lung was not functioning 100%. So in the evenings he had a nebulizer to help him breathe while he was in hospital. Because if I wasn't there, because I'd have to go to work obviously, so the ones that visited during the day, they saw what had happened, and so they'd get on the phone and ring up and say, hey, what happened? And then I'd be able to just say to them, well, this is what happened. Yeah, this was the results of the ECG, and so this is what where Dad's at, and it worked really well, because some worked back shifts and they would just pop in, and then they'd be able to have a good read and see that he hadn't had a good day, and so it would make them come a little bit more often, because I'd see he's had a hard day today, so bring the family in for a visit and it would pick him up. Yeah, it was a really good communication tool between all of us, and also another case was where they had changed his medication, and another sister was there, and because obviously she had read the diary, and when they brought in the meds, she asked what it was, and she said to the nurse, well, hey, that one's no, that's changed it. They changed it today. He's not having that one now. And then so the nurse went and checked, and yeah, it had changed. So yeah. I think that part of the problem is because of the two shifts, and I don't know if theirs it was a handover, but sometimes they'd come in and things had slightly changed. So I don't know if empowered's the word. I think really involved, and that we were like a part of the team to his recovery, and ensuring that he was getting better and going to be well, and to come home basically. Yeah. So it was a really good tool, and even at times the doctor, the consultant, actually thanked us for just reminding her, because we understood that they were busy, and that sometimes they forgot things. Some felt threatened, and that it was a deterrent for them to come into the room and actually, take care of him, and which resulted in we had a meeting to say, like, we're not here to judge you or to blame you or to watch you. We're actually here to help you look after him, because he's not going to let you touch him unless we're here. Like showering, he just wouldn't have any of them come in, and it was a lot for him to let us shower him, his babies, and so even that was a huge feat for our father. But so we would shower him, and we would also encourage him to eat, because he also lost his appetite. And we were kind of like the security blanket for him. So we kind of said, because he'd wake up and look over to see if we were there, and then he'd go back to sleep if he wasn't having a good night. So yeah, it became but once we had the talk with him and said that we were there in partnership with him for his care, then majority of them, they came right. And yeah, but it was also, at times it was also not a good thing, because they knew we were in there, they wouldn't come in and check up on him. So sometimes we would just leave the door open, have to push the door open, leave it open, and just go and see them and say, has he had this and has he had that, and no one's come to see him in the last 4 hours. Whereas when initially it was every 2 hours they would be coming in. Yeah. So, like when one of the nurses came in, she actually knelt down to his eye level and actually held his hand and introduced herself and asked what he preferred to be called, Mr. Bartlett or Desmond, and he actually said Des. So from there on, she called him Des, and was very. She was cheeky to him, so he liked that. It kind of broke the ice. Yeah. So I found that with most of the Indian nurses, they were like that. I don't know whether that was in their culture that's how they treated their elderly, but that's how they were with my father. So towards the end of his hospitalisation, he would ask if they were on that night, and he'd feel just a lot more comfortable. And they were a little bit more, even though they were pretty stern with their practice, they were still quite, what's the word?
Compassionate.
Yeah, compassionate towards him, his age and how he was feeling, and yeah. So it was, I'd probably say that the foreign nurses were their bedside manner was a lot better than our own. Actually, it starts right from emergency department. How are you today? And although it's like a pretty standard question, when you hear that from the emergency department, so then when that's the first nurse or doctor when you're being triaged, and then you see the next doctor and then he asks you, how are you today? And then you get onto the ward and that's all you've been asked is, how are you today? It got to a point where he would just shut off, because he just thought, I'm tired of them asking me, how am I today? Like, what do you think? How do you think I'm feeling today? I'm in pain. I can't get out of bed. I'm not eating. Yeah. And so I actually said to a doctor, can you please just not ask that? Because he's going to snap at you and say something really rude and I'll be embarrassed. So I just said to him, perhaps just ask him how his leg is. Not how are you today or how are you feeling, because he's not feeling good every day. Yeah, we had to after repeatedly saying to staff, he's deaf in one ear, or deaf in one ear and fully blind in one and partially blind in the other eye, and we ended up having to put a sign because they'd always go to the side that he couldn't hear, and then he'd just turn to me and say, I can't hear anything, or say rudely, so talk to her because I can't hear you standing there. So we'd put the little sign up above him, but it was like all they'd see was just poor hearing, can't hear on the right side, and would yell at the end of the bed. And so when they were yelling on his good side, he would say, oh gosh, I'm not in the other paddock, which is what we say because we live in the country. If you're yelling, we're not in the other paddock. Yeah, so, yeah. Or they'd give him something to read and he'd just say, I can't see it. So, yeah. It's little things like that, just to being a little bit more sensitive to, because it's not like they're in there because they want to be. It's because it is because they're unwell. We always had karakia, especially in the evenings, because that was when the family came in all together to visit. We understood about, too many of us because we were such a big family. So we'd try to keep it where it didn't impact on the rest of the patients or the hospital. So we would, every night we'd have karakia with him. Māori, other than, I think the whole way that we were was Māori, because I never saw other families staying there with their loved one during the night. I think that's just a Māori thing, the whānau support, and Māori kai, because we thought, at first we adhered to the nutritional diet, but in the end, because he wasn't eating anything, we thought we'd just resort to boil up and everything that he would normally eat, so and Māori bread, and so we'd start to bring it in. Yeah, and he started to eat. Yeah, a lot of it, I think, that though was to do with the medication. He just had no taste. Yeah, it was actually an elderly woman that was next to Dad, and non-Māori, and her daughter actually saw me one morning early. She had come in early in the morning, and I was actually packing up my bed, getting ready to go to work, go have a shower and go to work, and she just asked me, "Are you allowed to stay here?" And I said, "If you want, you just have to talk to the nursing staff." And I said, because sometimes they just your family just feel a bit more assured when you're there. And then the next day I saw her bringing in a mattress, and I thought, oh, good on you. I just thought, yeah. And then then she saw me bringing in food, and I said, well, because they don't like what's being served to them. So if it's going to help them eat, I said, the nurses are okay, you just need to check with them in case there's something in there that reacts with their medication, or, And she did the same thing. She started bringing her mum in some food. I think the key is communication. It's definitely communication between family and the clinicians, the medical staff, because if it creates what's the word? When you're left out of the loop, it can create havoc, because you're not knowing what's happening with your loved one in hospital. And then you can't explain it to them, because, with the barriers like my father's poor hearing and sight, he didn't, and because he just didn't understand what they were saying, he couldn't understand anything. So, we were there to explain to him, well, this is what's happening. They can't save your toe, they have to cut it off, and otherwise he wouldn't have known what was happening. And it was good for us too, because then we knew exactly what was happening, and we knew the risks that were, going to be taken with our father, so we understand fully what was happening, and that was all of us. So communication is a huge key, because if something goes wrong, everyone looks for someone to blame. So I think to avoid that, you need to push the communication between families and clinicians. I highly recommend a diary, because not only is it to keep everyone informed, the families, and it's also there as a memory. Like we still read the diary, and we have a little laugh with some that were not accustomed to spending a lot of time with our father, so and just reading their experience with him and them getting to know him a little bit better. Yeah, I felt that they only spoke to Dad. So they most of the time when the clinician came in, he stood at the end of the bed and spoke to our father with his file in front of him. So it wasn't really, there was that file in the whole bed in front of them. So he didn't really go and sit to the side and talk at a personal level. I felt, the nurses did more that personal interaction with my father, but not all of them. Like I said, it was mainly the foreign nurses that were more affectionate, shall I say? Yeah. But then I would just interrupt anyway, But see, not all families are like that. They don't have a spokesperson that's quite forceful or will, you know, put their nose right in there and say, well, what's that for? Why are you doing that? You know, what are the risks? They don't know. Not everyone knows the right questions to ask. We learnt that. I mean, I had 5 other sisters, and there was probably only one other that actually asked the right questions. So that would probably be my other advice to families, is make sure that you have a spokesperson that, or actually two that they have that personality. Yeah.
Te tua te whātui aputi, ka titiro hau ki peka peka, ara mai rā te karere, ko pōna turi, uia mai ki hangarea whānui, te tiki tiki o hikurangi, uia mai ki paki paki.